is there a way to actually make them pay for that? Because it's not the first violation that they have had of international law. This is a major terrorist act that they have committed. But who is going to hold them responsible in the international political and diplomatic arena, in your perspective?
No one is the short answer. International law hasn't really been worth the paper that it's written on since, certainly at least since 2003, when the US illegally invaded Iraq on a pack of lies, basically. So international law doesn't count for much anymore. The UN doesn't count for much anymore either. Of course, the world is divided, and as you just said, people who are going to see the US as a rogue state or some kind of an enemy of freedom in the world have already made that decision a long time ago. And the people who do not see the US as that, who believe the hype or the propaganda that the US is a representative of freedom and democracy, will have always believed that and will always believe that. So the world is very much divided on that line anyway, and on many other lines. But I don't think there's any way to. It's not going to happen that the US will suddenly be condemned or will somehow be condemned by every country in the world as some kind of a perpetrator of evil. It's just not going to happen. Everybody's going to have their perspectives. And of course, the killing of General Soleimani was a crime, a war crime. It was illegal, but again, what are you talking about here? What laws are you going to prosecute anyone for doing that? I mean, the US, many Western European countries, in fact, most countries in the world, in one way or another, their intelligence agencies, other military branches assassinate people. Mossad does it all the time. The CIA does it all the time. MI5, MI6 does it all the time. They have a long history of doing this kind of thing. So assassination isn't a strange thing. What's strange about this situation is that it was done so publicly and in such a flagrant and blatant way. That's what has everybody up in arms about it, essentially. But on the face of it, in terms of the history of the 20th century or the history of the last 20 or 30 years, it's not really unusual, except, as I said, in the high-profile way that it was done. Now, why was it done in that way? It's most likely Trump trying to stamp his authority on the situation, send a message to Iran, send a message to the people in the region that America is still a player, because Trump's main problem, his main issue, is not troops in the Middle East. He's actually quite happy, I think. He would be quite happy to have most troops, US troops in the Middle East, gone or removed or scale them down drastically, because that's what he campaigned on before he was president, and that's what he has repeatedly said on several occasions since he's been president. What Trump cares about most of all is money. And everybody should, I'm sure everybody knows that, and he admits that himself in one way or another very often, that he likes money. He's all about the economy and doing what's best for America and the American economy. And of course, the US does have, let's say legitimate, you might not agree, but from their perspective, it wants a piece of the pie in the Middle East. The Middle East has many resources that the U.S. is already...
Well, isn't that part of... Sorry to interrupt you, Joe, but that piece of the pie, doesn't that come from basically military occupation in the region? You said that even if the troops would leave the region, it's not going to make too much of a difference. But actually, for example, the various countries in the region that American troops are there, basically it's American occupation. These countries are not independent. They're not allowed to basically operate in the manner that they want. And I think the leader of the Islamic Revolution, when speaking about that, and others, of course, are basically talking about the people of the region taking back their independence and dignity. And the first step is actually kicking the American troops out of the region.
Right, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a legitimate goal for any country in the Middle East to want to achieve. Not all of them want to achieve that, of course. Israel certainly don't want Bahrain, don't want to leave. Iraq, Syria, Iran, well, there's no troops in Iran, but Iraq and Syria, yes. They definitely want US troops out, and it's true that the US military has for a very long time served their main goal in the Middle East was to protect oil wells more than anything else. But I think Trump's attitude here is that he doesn't want to be kicked out of the Middle East. He doesn't want the US kicked out of the Middle East, with ignominiously, let's say, and told never to return. That's what he said to Iraq. For example, he tweeted, I think, a few days ago, that if Iraq is going to vote, if Iraq forces US troops out or votes in the parliament, which they did, to force US troops out, that unless they do it in a friendly way, he said, that the US will sanction them. So it's all economic talk from Trump here, you know. And what he means by unless they do it in a friendly way, which means it is Trump speak for unless they negotiate some kind of a good economic deal or allow US businesses, US companies to continue to operate to whatever extent. And in theory, that's all open for discussion.
Okay.
So that's where he's come from.
Iran, then, when it's taking its military option and also uniting, the region right now is uniting behind Iran. Maybe not all of the regimes, but the people of the region. I mean, wouldn't that be the best way to go forward in order to get everyone united and basically to get the United States kicked out of the area? So hopefully there can be some type of security in this area.
Yes, so you're saying that Donald Trump just did Iran and the people in the region a favor by killing Soleimani.
No, I'm not saying that he did a favor. I'm saying he's continuing on a line that was started in 1979. So at the end of the day, if the people unite because of whatever it may be, it is necessary in order to kick the Americans out of the region. What I'm asking you is there any other way? Because when we're talking to Lawrence, and not just Lawrence, of course, other analysts, and talking about, again, the diplomatic channels that can be taken and trying to get the international entities, for example, the United Nations and others. I mean, when we look at the diplomatic channels, even right now, Iran's foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, wanted to go to the United Nations just to talk about this situation. And actually, he was not even given a visa by the United States to enter the country. So then obviously, Iran's hands are tied in that way. And it seems that the other way is the only way that can get something done. I'm asking your take on that.
Yeah. Well, there is another way. It's obviously not through or a way other than military confrontation, which isn't really an option for Iran or for anyone in the Middle East. There is another way, and Iran has been pursuing that. And in fact, that's the pathway that Iran has been pursuing over the past few years is really largely the cause of, or largely what provoked the attack, the assassination of Soleimani, and that is that Iran has been looking east. Both Iran and Iraq have been developing their ties with China, with Russia, essentially getting on board with the idea of Eurasian integration. I notice that people even are starting to talk, political pundits at least, that are, inclined towards the East rather than the West, are starting to call the Middle East West Asia. So there's this move on to knit together Eurasia, obviously starting with moving westwards from China into the Middle East, and even from China's perspective into Europe, to knit all of that together. And of course, the idea of a Eurasian integration is a big threat, always has been a big threat for America, because America is way over there on the other side of the Atlantic. So definitely, I think the best, and I said this before, I think when the last time I was talking on your show, that the best approach for Iran right now, after keeping its pride intact and sending a signal to the US by launching the missiles last night, the best approach it can pursue now is the one that it has been pursuing, which is to continue with its alliances with major powers in the region and in the world, and even keep going with, the idea that there was some kind of a détente or a peace accord developing between Iran and Saudi Arabia. That's a very good idea as well, to basically change the reality on the ground by working with the countries in the region and with partners further afield, China, Russia, and in that way let a natural reality of an integration of Eurasia essentially take shape, and America will simply have to face that reality and accept it ultimately. And I think there's with Trump, actually, you probably have a better partner in that respect than previous US presidents. The only problem, of course, is Israel, because Israel does not like the idea of any kind of a unity breaking out amongst predominantly Muslim countries in the Middle East. It's always been its existential nightmare, let's say.
Right.
Israel is a big wild card in that respect.
Well, speaking of Israel, Joe, staying with you, how much of a role, or do you see any role that Israel has played in all of this, the attacks on General Soleimani? Because we saw immediately following the attacks, basically Netanyahu was thrilled and congratulated Donald Trump on something that had needed to be done a long time ago. Do you think that Israel had a hand in this and played a role at all?
I think it was. I think the assassination of Soleimani was largely the work of Israel. Israel was very quiet in the immediate aftermath of it, other than just saying it was a good, they applauded it, but they were quite quiet. And that's very often a sign that Israel is involved in something, not always, but sometimes a sign that they're involved in something when they don't say very much about something that would naturally be in their interest. And of course, there have been allegations that Soleimani was being tracked by Mossad, by the Israeli intelligence services. So definitely this only serves, primarily, let's say, serves Israel in its long-term goal that is still there. And as far as the Israelis are concerned, they want to keep this goal front and center forever, which is to prevent Arab unity, Arab-Persian, let's say, unity in the Middle East. Because if that ever happened, if Israel cannot keep that region in which it planted itself, 70 or 80 years ago, if it can't keep that region divided and against each other, if there's unity, then Israel is going to have to answer some very tough questions about the way it has been, behaving for most of its existence, and it's going to have to change its behavior and face a new reality where it can't be this kind of secret, covert hegemon in the Middle East with all of its nuclear weapons, engaging in dirty tricks and destabilization efforts for decades. It's going to have to face a reality. But I don't know if the Israelis, given what I understand of the Israeli mentality, I don't know if they will ever be able to go there. And they are a serious danger because they do have 200, 300, however many you want to imagine, nuclear weapons. And Trump, of course, is, like every president for quite a long time, under the thumb, to one extent or another, of the very powerful Israeli lobby in Washington, D.C. And I mean, one of his biggest donor, the biggest campaign donation in the history of campaign donations was from Sheldon Adelson, who is absolutely an Israel firster, and he gave $25 million to Donald Trump during his campaign, and gave him another $5 million after he was elected. So I mean, Israel is this kind of elephant in the room that it very often isn't spoken about, and it needs to be spoken about much more often, because it is a serious player and a serious antagonist in this whole issue. If Israel didn't exist, we probably wouldn't be having these problems that we're having right now. We may not even have had everything we've had since 9/11.